requires interpretation services tonight. Anybody needing Spanish? Doesn't look like it. Thank you, Mr. David. Appreciate you being here. I'm going to call us into order at 7:03. And welcome everyone to the Greater Albany Public School Board meeting. Happy birthday, Oregon, and happy Valentine's Day. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you again. Director Nyquist will be here shortly. And we are going to move on to agenda item C, approval of the agenda.
I move to accept the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much. That will move us into section D, comments from the public, which will have a brief description from our superintendent, Mr. Rob Saxon.
Thank you, Chair Agnagua. Yes, we have 7 public comments this evening. One regarding public comment into the superintendent process. One regarding the superintendent search and listening session concerns. One recommends seeking advice on changes to masking mandate. 2 with concern about low student outcome results, and 2 in opposition to masks and or COVID-19 protocol. I think it's important for people to know that the full text that comes to the board is given to the board, and so that they can read all of this, and they do, and that these are greatly reduced in length and summarized. So just to start, public comment number 1 regarding public comment into the superintendent process. I was glad for an opportunity to speak into this process and then shocked at the almost non-existent window of time to do so. The impact of this is that I do not have confidence that the board truly wants community feedback. Public comment number 2, concern about low student outcome results. I'm very concerned regarding the low and declining number of students in GAPS who are on track to graduate, and only 32% of our 11th grade students passed the state math test in 2019. Further, in 2 of our elementary schools, only 17% of our 3rd graders passed state math tests and only 11% passed English tests, while school funding increased an average of 18.49% every year for the past 16 years. According to The Economist, November 6, 2021 edition, America has a math problem. Its pupils have ranked poorly in international math exams for decades. Very small amount of patents were coming out of our engineering schools. Students who graduate with low basic skills in math and reading are going to have a hard time in employment, increasing society's problems. If the stated mission of the school is building bridges to lifelong learning and brighter futures, what is the school's strategy to carry out the mission? In view of the devastatingly low and declining performance, we need to have an urgent, efficient, and effective plan to reach the school's mission as soon as possible. Public comment number 3, opposition to masks in schools. I'm writing to you to discuss the upcoming mask mandate that is being lifted, allowing each school district to make the decision on mask wearing. I am asking you to please unmask our children. This is child abuse. Sitting in a mask for 8 hours is unhealthy. The CDC now states that masks don't stop the spread of COVID-19, so why continue? Lastly, teachers have brought their personal beliefs and fears into the classroom. This should not be acceptable. They have one job: to give my children an education. The abuse needs to stop, and parents need to make the right decision for our child to wear a mask or not the state or school district leaders. No one but me, their parent. Public comment number 4, opposition to masks and COVID-19 requirements. It's time to restore normalcy to our children in schools by dropping all COVID requirements, particularly the masking and social distancing. Masks and vaccines are now easily accessible to those who want them. Masks should be optional now and for future variants. March 13th will mark 2 years since our school last attended a normal day of school. We must not allow this to continue into a 3rd year. Students have suffered negatively from long-term masking and deserve to have their needs respected and met. Kids are not benefiting from wearing cloth masks because they do not protect against transmission. Please choose to stand up for kids alongside their parents. As parents, we want nothing less than the best and safest environment for our kids, their peers, and teachers. Push back against OHA, the governor, and ODE on this permanent mask mandate today and future mask mandates. It's time for local control. Public comment number 5, superintendent search listening session concerns. I'm writing on 2 related topics, the superintendent search and the listening sessions. I closely follow the superintendent search process and participated in the various survey opportunities provided. My conclusion is that all the words, charts, process hours, and dollars spent could not make up for the unwillingness of many candidates, and particularly those representing diversity, to trust their future to a board that might treat them as it did Melissa Goff. I do not hold Andy Gardner responsible for a stage he did not set. Of course, I wish him well and will do what I can to support him. Listening sessions. I understand that these are meant to provide an informal setting for conversation between board members and the community. I would be interested to know what board members' objective measures for the sessions might be. I attended one session at which I was able to ask a question with some follow-up. My question was about the superintendent search, and I came away with the understanding that as far as the salary was concerned, $220,000 was not a fixed amount, but was rather being offered as an upper range to signal that the board was looking for the gold standard in candidates, and final proffered salary would depend on the candidate. I was therefore startled when that figure was announced as the new superintendent's salary. Public comment number 6, desire for an academic improvement plan. I write to say that we need to have a publicized academic improvement plan that would lead to 100% of our students passing the state testing in reading and math in 6 years, with strategy and timeline. This way, students can have a good education without going to private schools. Public comment number 7, seeking advice on changes to mask mandate. As we move toward March and approach the probability of a statewide removal of the mask mandate, please carefully consider any action around these requirements. We know the history of this most recent board and that you have essentially committed yourselves to the minimum possible restrictions and constraints while simultaneously maintaining that you place the health and safety of all students, faculty, and staff in your priorities. From all we know about the behavior of COVID-19 virus and variants, this is a significant contradiction. One moment. Teach me to click on the wrong thing, I apologize. I implore you to seek and follow the advice of dedicated experts and professionals in your decision-making. Information, policies, and guidelines from the CDC, ODE, Lynn County Health, and especially Director of Health Services for the district, Rachel Smith, are crucial to an informed process. That was the last one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent. That brings us to E, Board Business, and E1, Superintendent Introduction. Just like to give a round of applause and thank you so much for going through an extensive interview process. I think there was 5 interviews total. And just welcome Andy Gardner to the Greater Albany Public Schools as our inbound superintendent. Thank you very much, sir.
And Chair Aganagwa, did you want to give Superintendent Gardner an opportunity to say a couple words?
Yeah, I'd love to if he wants to.
If he wants.
No pressure.
There's a chair here if you want.
Oh, it's all right. I'll just sit right here for a second. I really appreciate being here tonight. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for the opportunity to answer so many questions so extensively off the cuff. I actually kind of enjoyed that. I think I mentioned a couple of times, I'm not very good. I haven't done a lot of applications, but I do feel like I have a lot of experience in my time as a principal and as a superintendent in the North Santiam School District. I don't believe I've wasted that time and not learned, and I'm still learning today. And we'll start learning about this district here this spring. Looking forward to that. In April, we'll start to, I'm working with Chris to create days in the district, and we're building a plan around who we'll start working with first, and then what that will look like as we move into the summer. Be meeting with a lot of school staff in April and into early May, all the leaders. We'll move into community members as we get into the summer, and we'll be looking for themes. And we'll let you guys know kind of what the questions are that we're going to ask of people, and just try to get a really great context for the work. For the most part, what we do is we work with people, and it's just really important to figure out, where people are coming from, what they've experienced, and most importantly, where we're going to go. So I appreciate your time, and thank you for having me down tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I'll give board members a second if anyone has anything to say.
Just would say welcome and excited to have you here. Look forward to working with you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we are going to move into E2, and this is our Budget Committee recommendations.
You want me to take that?
Sure.
We had an outstanding 16 applicants. I don't recall, even before when I was on the board, that many people applied for the Budget Committee before. Director Wilson and I met and went through the applications and have come up with a recommendation of 2 individuals for the 2 open slots. They are Grant Webster and Dana Aguilar. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. Algaier. Director Wilson wants to add anything.
No, that summed up our discussion.
So if there's a motion on the table,
I would make those 2 names of Grant Webster and Dana Aguilar a motion to be appointed to the Budget Committee.
and a second. As,
All second.
okay, any discussion?
I have just a question. Is the number 10 an absolute number, and is there methodology behind that? I, for one, am very concerned about the budget year coming up with all the moving parts to operating the school district this year and an influx of one-time money. A lot of activity prior to me arriving as a board member, and not knowing how that looks on the other side. I think we need the best and most talented eyes possible in our community, looking at numbers and projections and asking a lot of questions. So just the background on why 10 is the number, and is that in statute or administrative rules somewhere, or how do we get to that?
No, I was gonna,
Oh, good.
you probably have the answer. You know, in ROS, every jurisdiction has a city, county, school districts, ESDs, has equal number to the elected body. So that's where you get the 5, 5, and 10. And I'm gonna guess that's in ROS statute. I guess it's part of local budget law.
And Chair Aganagwa, if I could answer, I do believe that it is a rule or in statute that it's supposed to be half board member, half community member. I know that it's in policy. If I misspeak about it being in statute, it's possible that I am misspeaking, but I don't think so. I think that is what the requirement is.
Okay?
So, further,
So I guess all I would say about that is I would like the information as early as possible, because I'll do some outreach as well. I think we'd all agree, a lot of moving parts, a lot of unknowns, and we need to be as confident as we can going forward that we have a good financial plan for next year.
I'll be happy to look into that and make certain I'm correct and get back to you.
so for sitting on the budget committee for a couple of years and attending budget committee meetings for a couple of years, I've watched the budget not change from any recommendation from the budget committee or the board, and I've watched oversight of it not be the clearest of all time. When we had our last budget committee appointee, we didn't pick somebody that had a lot of experience in financial responsibilities, large organizations. And for that, I would like to amend the motion to add, or to strike the second person and have it read Grant Webster and Jennifer Stanway because of her experience in financial oversight.
My personal opinion is we should let it as stand. We've got a motion and you've got a second. It's on the floor. I'm sure that Ms. Stanaway would be happy to engage me with the documents I get in advance and go through that and give input. We are where we are at this point, and I would go forward accordingly.
I feel that some of these are done more politically than for professional experience in this, so I'm a little worried.
Well, we are a publicly elected body. Sometimes that happens.
It's not an easy decision, but you were thorough, and I think I want to speak for Director Wilson, but we had some, thoughts and some values that went into these decisions, and that's, what you see before you is our recommendation.
I would call the question.
So, does that mean we vote?
Oh, do we need a second? I'll call the
You would need a second.
Well,
on the
there's
call
a
to
motion
question.
on the table, though, at the same time.
So I guess
And I'm
procedurally,
attempting to
what-
call that motion for a vote.
What do we need to do here?
So we can either fail to have a second, or we can do a second.
I would second Director Nichols' motion.
That's not the motion on the table at the time.
Please restate the motion on the table.
To move Grant Webster and Jennifer Stanaway to the Budget Committee.
So you're going to call for a vote?
No, that's not the motion.
There's been a request to speak into the microphone because they can't hear.
Well, I'm masked on.
So here, let me attempt to do the play-by-play. I guess.
So I'll recall my motion,
You-
and you can call the question.
Oh, you're, okay. So you're withdrawing your
I'll
motion?
recall my motion.
Okay. So at that point, there's no need to call the question.
So all in favor of approving the recommended person by Mr. Thompson and Mr. Wilson? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Nay. I'll move us into section F, superintendent comments.
Thank you, Chair Aganagua. First I wanted to just thank the board for their hard work on recruiting and finding a superintendent. I want to welcome Andy Gardner. I've known Andy for a long time, served with him on the OSAA board, discussed education philosophy and equity on numerous occasions, and know he'll do a great job for Albany Public School District. We've been working on a transition plan, and I'm really committed to a smooth handoff, so whatever it takes to make that happen, we'll make sure that it does. I know that recently, just on another topic, there's been a lot of opinion and emotion out there right now in regard to the mask mandate in schools. We know that officials in Salem have told us the mask mandate for schools at the state level will lift on March 31st for schools and will become the decision of local decision makers, and that means county health authorities in our case, and after county health authorities, then school boards and superintendents. And we can find out what Lynn and Benton counties decide, and the district can't do anything that's less restrictive than the county health authorities. But I also know that the school board has been pretty clear, this school board, that they intend for the district to adhere to a vote that they took in August and follow mandates, but nothing more. And I anticipate if nothing changes, that means masks will become optional for our students on March 31st. Currently, that also means the district would revert to the rules previously in place prior to masking. So that there'd be an effort at 6-foot social distancing, and if we don't have 6-foot social distancing and there is contact, that we would be into contact tracing and quarantines for students who are exposed, as it currently exists by rule. That I also know that we will be in the process of putting together a safe in-person instruction, return to school, in-person instruction, continuity of service plan, which is due to Oregon Department of Education on March 30th. And we'll be putting our plan together closer to that date after monitoring COVID and after providing the state with time to make any changes. We're 6 weeks out from this change, and in 6 weeks, in the lifetime of COVID, is a really long time. I think I've said I've been in weeks where there have been 3 or 4 or 5, 6 different mandate changes over the course of a week. And over 6 weeks, I've seen 2 different varieties be predicted and come to fruition. And so there's a lot of different pieces about this that need to be monitored, looked at, and followed between now and March 31st. And so we'll need to do that, and we'll also need to put together a good plan that will keep folks safe. But it's likely, if all things stay equal, case counts stay down, no new varieties come up, hospitalizations go down, and the state stays the course, that on March 31st, we'll have masks optional in our schools in this school district, and we'll have to be thoughtful about the other pieces that are required along with that to make sure that we're keeping people, as kids, as safe and adults as safe as possible. So with the social distancing and the contact tracing and those things. We'll also have to consider other things like students who are medically fragile and so on. So we'll go through that process and make sure that we do a good job of making any changes or implementation. Again, for me to say that that's precisely what's going to happen just isn't true, right? There's going to be a lot of water that goes under the bridge in the next 6 weeks, and I would encourage everybody to stay patient. I also would like to point out that, you know, this is a natural progression in the lifetime of this virus, in this experience. There is a time, I hope, right, when the virus will begin to recede, and maybe this is it, and there'll be a time where we can take off masks, and we can do it in a thoughtful and intelligent way. And the fact that this is happening is a really good thing. It is expected, and hopefully this is the time where we actually get to take them off and keep them off going forward. We don't know, but we'll find out as we move forward. And I would expect that actually this is something in many ways, even though it's going to create some challenge, that we should embrace. I did want to say to the board, budget season's upon us. We've undergone an incredible number of changes in regard to our budget over the last year, from changes in the state school fund numbers, enrollment numbers, ballot measure 98 funds, Student Investment Act, ESSER funds, as well as numerous changes in personnel within our operations department. And I want the board to know that I've contracted the district with Janice and Lance Cawley to help us with our current budget and the creation of the 2022-2023 budget. I worked with Janice when I was at the Northwest Regional Education Service District. I've known Lance by reputation for a long time. He was the business manager in the Roseburg School District. They're extremely competent, and I'll rest easier with their expertise and advice. I have a meeting with them tomorrow as they begin their work, and you'll all have a chance to meet them as we head into budget meetings this spring. So for now, that would be my comments for the evening. I'd be happy to take any questions about this or any other thing in the district. Members of the board.
Superintendent Saxon, if I could just follow up on the COVID, the mandates, restrictions. As I remember the motion, and it's the policy of the board being that we will follow all requirements around COVID. We will follow the law. Recommendations are just that. And there's a reason in the methodology of the development of requirements and recommendations that some are recommendations and some are requirements. We need to be consistent, and we need to communicate clearly. And the federal recommendations and the state requirements are what they are. And I for one, am discouraging additional requirements at the county level or as a school board member at this level. We need one set of rules and we need to follow them. And there are times people on both sides don't like that, but we're either a legitimate government body, a school district, operating in Albany, Oregon, the United States, and we follow the law or we don't. And I hear arguments on both sides to do something different than that, and I respect people's right to their opinions. I also say that it's unrealistic for anybody to expect a school board to ignore the law or as well to take liberties away from kids and their families when it's debatable whether or not that should happen. And again, I would default back to state law on that. So I'm glad you raised the issue and we're talking about it a little bit, but we could talk about this all day, every day between now and the end of March. And once you get away from that base of following the requirements in the law, my experience is things unravel pretty quickly.
Right. So Chair Aganagua, Director Nyquist, what you said is precisely how I recall it as well. And I do think that that directive was given in August last year, and that it has created a high level of consistency and expectation and sort of knowing on the part of people in the district what the district is likely to do. I think it's been a good thing for us. So thank you for that.
The other thing I would add is if people don't like that position or they don't like the state law, there's a process and a way to engage that, much more productive than talking to engaging a local school board who really is powerless to change state law.
Good, sir.
Yes, thank you.
I'll bring us to board reports, board liaison reports. Mr. Wilson?
I, last Wednesday, got to spend 2.5 hours with Principal Osborne at West Albany High School, and with regards to the CTE programs that they're providing there. And I was incredibly impressed. She was very generous with her time. We ping-ponged back and forth between classrooms because teachers had different schedules they had to meet and go to. So we were able to get back and meet everyone, from the stage to woodworking, finance and marketing, which I really enjoyed because I'm a marketing geek and that's what I like to do. But just an incredible program. My first time to see the facility in any depth, and what has been put together at West Albany High School is truly incredible. I'm now looking forward to going to South Albany High School and having John Hunter show me around and learn that CTE program so that we can try to advance offerings to students when they leave high school.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Charlton? Mr. Morris? Mr. Nichols? And that brings us to board member reports and student board member reports.
Thank you. I just have a few quick things. First of all, I wanted to congratulate and welcome Andy Gardner, wishing you a smooth transition into our district, and I'm hoping you all the best in the upcoming months. And here are some exciting achievements from the past couple of weeks that have come from West Albany. So first of all, a few weeks ago, 15 West Albany art students received honors in the statewide Scholastic Art and Writing Contest. Mr. Wilson kind of spoke to just how amazing West Albany's CTE programs are. So congratulations to these art students for their excellence in the fine arts, from ceramics to illustration to photography and more. And our art program is now recognizing Black History Month by celebrating the work of Black artists and how that has shaped the art world. And then next, this weekend, or I guess this past weekend, our cheer team took 3rd place at the OSAA State Championship. Our dance team, the West Albany High Steppers, took home a 1st place in the 5A division at their competition. And then our boys and girls swim teams were competing at the 5A district meet. several of our individual swimmers, as well as both our girls and boys relay teams placed at districts and will be competing in-state this Friday. We also had on Saturday the West Salem Jazz Festival, where West Albany's Jazz 1 ensemble took first place in the 5A division, advanced, and then Jazz 2 took third place in the intermediate division. This Wednesday, you have a chance to see both of these outstanding bands, as well as bands from North Albany and Memorial Middle School. That's February the 16th, 6:30 p.m. in the Albany Performing Arts Center. So if you're looking for an opportunity to see Greater Albany Public School excellence in action, this is a great event to check out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you. Chris, would you mind reading Esperanza's for us? Oh, I can't do that. And a big congratulations on Esperanza. She has been nominated as Student of the Year for the Chamber of Commerce within the city of Albany. That's pretty awesome.
Cool. I'll go ahead and read the report because the microphone doesn't reach for Chris. So Esperanza says, sorry for not being able to attend the meeting, but I would still love to share all of the wonderful things happening at South Albany right now. Today, valograms were handed out in order to celebrate Valentine's Day, and it was a wonderful moment to have a little more fun in the classrooms. Red Hawk Rising and Upward Bound tutoring have started up again to help students keep on track. For the past 2 weeks, more than 97 missing assignments have been turned in, and more than 6 finals have been completed. Please note that Red Hawks Rising and Upward Bound, the tutorings are for students who need extra support and students in general who want to benefit from this fantastic opportunity, and you can show up without an invitation. We will be hosting our first career day on February 24th for the first time in 2 years. We are super excited and grateful to have this opportunity to do so. Same thing with our Gathering of Champions, which will be on the 22nd of this month in order to celebrate the magnificent accomplishments of our students. This week, we're celebrating kindness at South Albany High School with some dress-up days, and it's been great to see students participating. She also mentions that she'd like to share the names of students, state qualifiers. So cheerleading team placed 4th at state. In wrestling, they had a 3 third places, 2 second places, and 2 fourth place finishers. In swimming, they had several swimmers who took 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th places in the state meet qualifiers, and were seeded for the state events. And it looks like that's all.
Thank you, ma'am. That's going to bring us to our consent agenda. Item I1 is action to move and approve personnel certified as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Item I2, action, move to approve personnel classified as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Item I3, action to approve minutes from 11/29/21 special board meeting as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? And I4, motion to approve minutes from 12/13/21 regular board meeting as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Harlan, you have K1.
Great, thank you. Board Chair, Vice Chair, members of the board. I'd like to present to you today the elementary and middle school academic report. So a few things before we get started. One, the high school portion of this report you'll see on the 28th of this month. During finals for high schools, we had quite a number of students who were absent due to illness, and so the high schools extended their incomplete. So those grades have not finished up, giving students a chance to make up their finals. And so we wanted to give you accurate counts before we did that. think we may need to turn on the projector again. I wonder if it either switched off or fell asleep. Well, thankfully, it is, we haven't shut off yet. Is it warming up? The PowerPoint is the one that's available in your board packet as well, so I'll go ahead and get started. So members of the audience will be able to see that as we continue on. Perfect. So a few things before we get into the scores. Just so you all know, we do benchmark assessments 3 times a year. That's the fall, winter, and the spring, and we do that for reading and for math, and we do it K-8. So the elementary schools have been involved in the implementation of multi-tiered systems of support. It started out as RTI for many years. For middle school, this is about the 2nd year in earnest that they've been involved in that implementation. And it marks the 1st year that we've had benchmark assessments, specifically in middle school for both reading and for math. Just so you know, this is just one piece of a balanced assessment system, and you'll see scores that compare 1920. So that was the school year where students started school like a typical year following a typical year, and we have fall and winter for that as compared to this year. And again, the high school report will be coming at your next board meeting. So the scores you're about to see include Acadience or DIBELS data, which is the assessment that we use at the elementary level, and Easy CBM, which is the assessment we use at the middle school level. So what you'll see are all of the elementary schools and RIM. A reminder, RIM is our remote instructional model. When you see Timber Ridge, it is accounting just for the Timber Ridge students that are in elementary school. When you see it for middle school, it's just the middle school students. You'll see the fall of 1920, and that's the percentage of students according to this assessment, which is DIBELS or Acadience assessment for reading, that were at or above their benchmark. So in the fall, if you're starting the 3rd grade, that assessment would be at the 3rd grade fall level. When it's the winter, it would be like you were taking the assessment and it was 3.5 or 3.6. The assessment changes, assuming that you've had months of growth, right? So it's not the same assessment. I want to just make sure that I point that out. So it's the fall as compared to the winter of 1920 to 21-22 for all of our elementary schools. Of course, an NA for RIM because we didn't have RIM in 1920. The other thing of note here is Meadow Ridge had different grade configurations in 1920 than it did in 21-22. The next slide shows the growth for reading. So that's a lot of data, and you might want to know just what is the difference then. So from fall to winter in 1920 as compared to fall to winter in 21-22. So the percentage of students that were at or above benchmark from 1 year compared to 2 years later. So for some of our schools, again, you'll see that there was an increase of the percentage of students who are at or above benchmark, and some schools you'll see that there wasn't. One thing of note on this for Tangent, if you'll remember Tangent during the winter benchmark window was closed or had some kind of hybrid, they had quite a large number of students who were ill. And they're actually quite a small school, so it's under 100 students. I think they have 94 right now. So there isn't a lot of confidence in the winter scores there, but I wanted to point that out.
Can I ask a question? So is this a different measurement than the previous chart?
No. So this is taking the fall to winter of 1920 and comparing it to say how many grew during that span of time and comparing it to how many grew during that same span of time in 21-22. The assessment that's used is the same.
So
So the previous chart, my initial reaction was, uh-oh. But the next one doesn't, you know, as I add those up from the last chart, I see negative numbers this year compared to last year, but as I look at that, I see positive numbers.
Well, so it's growth. So let's take Central, for example, at the top. In the fall of 1920, 65.95% of Central students were at or above benchmark in the fall. In the fall of 21-22, when we started this year, 59% were. So we know that fewer students started the year at benchmark. But if you compare the fall to the winter, right? So the fall of 1920, 65.9%. The winter of 1920, it was 53.9%. So in Central's case, it did go down. But in all of the other cases, it went up. The part that you're saying uh-oh about, which is completely true and valid, is that students in general started this year. There were fewer students that started at benchmark than in years previous. But when you look at the growth page, one of the things that you'll see is that a lot of schools grew more than they did in previous years from fall to winter.
Okay.
So we have the same data for elementary, and we have the same for middle school. So our middle school reading data, the assessment there is easy CBM, so this is a different assessment that's used than in elementary. Again, we have RIM, there isn't information for 1920, that didn't exist. So in the fall of 1920, compared to the winter of 1920. One of the things that's interesting that we have seen, research shows and bears out kind of nationally, is reading trends in terms of this year on average. Students who started the year, there were about a 10 to 12% drop in the number of students who started the year at benchmark for reading in elementary. But that trend doesn't bear out in middle school. And one of the theories is because once you reach a certain level of reading mastery or achievement, you don't lose reading gains in the same way that you would for math, for example. So once I know how to decode and I'm a fluent reader, the things that I grow in after that usually are vocabulary. My vocabulary can always deepen, and maybe my speed, my fluency. And so this actually bore out with our data. So our middle schoolers actually started this fall higher than they did before in terms of their reading, right? So once you achieve a certain level of reading, you generally don't lose it. I don't suddenly become, at a third grade reading level if I've been at a sixth grade reading level. Again, you'll see the same thing didn't bear out for math, and research says that it doesn't, right? Math is something that you do need daily practice, or you would regress. As all of us who may have not done high school math know, helping our kids with their homework, it feels like it was a long time ago and it goes fast. So for our middle schools, again, you'll see fall 1920 to winter 1920 as compared to 21-22, and then again, you'll see what that growth looks like, what the growth looked like before and after. One of the things that's interesting to note, for example, if you take Timber Ridge, from fall to winter, the growth was a lot more, but if you go back a slide, you'll see that they started out higher, right? So when you start with a higher percentage of your students at or on grade level, right, you don't have as much room to grow, and certainly we would want all of them. Okay, so that's reading. Now, math scores. Math from 1920, same years that we're looking at, and for math, it's easy CBM. That's the assessment that's used. So you'll notice for K-5, there isn't a 1920 because they didn't take the assessment in 1920. So elementary schools really started the implementation of RTI or MTSS with reading, and then they have started with math. But these are the fall to winter scores for easy CBM math for K-5. We were able to include RIM because we had our remote instructional students take that assessment. You'll see a blank spot for tangent because not enough students took that assessment during the winter benchmark. And then you'll see the growth. Oh, no, I didn't do a growth. It's just those two, fall to winter. A concern here for many schools is that not as many students stay at or above grade level in the winter. And then you have math data for grades 6 through 8. This does compare 1920 to 21-22. Again, when you see Timber Ridge, those are only middle school students at Timber Ridge. We separated out the elementary and middle, so 4, 5, and 6 through 8. And because we had 1920 data, you do see growth. And just as a reminder, it's not the same as the exact same assessment they take in the fall and the winter, right? So if I took the 6th grade math in the fall, it'd be like 6.5 when I take it in the winter, because it's assuming that you have had however many months of school that you've had.
That answers one of my questions I hadn't yet asked. The numbers just jump around to me. I'm not seeing a theme or a trend, and that the changing in the test, I guess, would be part of that. The other would, do we know what our participation level is? Is every student?
For sure. So we have an N size. So typically, yes, it is every student. But of course, you have some students that move or something happens. So for Tangent, for instance, on one of the math ones, you'll notice that we didn't post a score because there weren't enough. But typically, yes, it's every student because they're universal screeners for sure. That's their intent. And when we see that there's some risk, then we would do a diagnostic assessment. But these are intended for every student.
So what's our goal? The 40s and 50s numbers, if we're improving that, I like that, but that we're at 40, what about the other 55% of those?
Yep.
What's reasonable and what are goals we could or should expect to achieve?
Yep.
We're leaving a lot of kids behind, and I know it's not because we're not trying.
Right. We'll get there on that last slide. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for teeing that up. So the next data point that I wanted to point out was attendance for this year. And I think that this is something that would be good for everybody to know and to really pay attention to in our community. So here's the overall attendance in the winter of 1920 and this last winter. And what it compares our regular attendance rate for the overall district in 1920 was 92.46%. So you could say about each day, that's daily average attendance. About 8% of our students weren't at school. This year, it's at 89.96, and it's broken down by level. But that's different than our regular attenders. So you can say we have about 10% of our students that are absent each day, but kind of which 10%? Regular attenders is the percentage of students who have fewer than 10 days, or I think the equivalency prorated, of absences a year. So the average number of absences that a student has in a year is 10 to 12 days. And so the percentage of students who you have regularly attending makes a huge difference, right? If you're a teacher and you're teaching a lesson or a unit and you feel like a third of your class is gone, how much more material can you cover and how much you have to review? What we see not only is on our average daily attendance, typically it's around 92 to 95% in a typical year. Obviously, 89 is about as low as I've ever seen it. But our regular attenders rate is so concerning. It's very difficult to make progress with a whole class if only 60% of your students are regularly attending. I think it's an important number that is not, we don't utilize enough or enough people know about. I think we blew a breaker or something.
Yep, we lost mics too.
Yep, that's why I think so. So our regular attender rate for overall as a district is 61, but like for our high schools, it's 59%. That's pretty concerning. And certainly overall 61%. It makes the improvements or the growth more impressive, and it makes the goals that you will have, you'll have to tackle the attendance goal in order to make some progress. And then kind of the last slide are actions moving forward. And so kind of what are those things? So the first thing that you'll see on there, and it's in bold because if we don't get this done, then the rest will be difficult, if not impossible to do, is strengthening our MTSS structures throughout the organization. So like I said, we're on about year 2 of implementation at middle school. And it really does take about 3 to 5 years to solidify implementation of those things to make it part of just how we do business. But we need that system K-12. And basically an MTSS system gives you early indicators or early warnings that students need more support and help. The earlier you can intervene, the more efficient and the easier it is. It's much easier to intervene when a student is struggling in the beginning, especially in younger grades, before they're 2 or 3 grade levels behind, right? When they're only a little bit, they need a little bit extra support. So MTSS systems, we will not improve our academics in the way that we need to unless we get that done. And research bears that out. All of your successful districts in the state and out of the state, that's the thing that you'll see that's a common denominator. Other things, implementation of preschool at all of our title schools, and extended learning time and opportunities. Students who are behind have to grow faster than their peers to catch up. So if I'm a grade level below in reading and or math, and Rob is my peer, I have to actually grow faster than he does in order to catch up with the learning. And in order to do that, I have to have more time, more opportunities to respond, and more practice. And so really looking at after-school programs, after-school tutoring, certainly summer programs, and how we use our instructional time that we have will be key. Ensuring a guaranteed and viable curriculum with a menu of interventions that staff are trained and know diagnostically when to apply what will also be key, and that's a key factor of MTSS systems. We're currently working with Education Excellence on some strategies in terms of our guaranteed and viable curriculum. And just, we have an English language arts adoption this year that I'm excited because it allows us an opportunity we haven't had in at least 7 years. I'm in a math one next year to look at curriculum that has foundational skills that are embedded as part of the core curriculum. That was one of the things that we have found in the last few years is our literacy curriculum didn't have foundational skills embedded in the early years. And so we supplemented, but we have an opportunity in our curriculum adoption to be able to do that. Also implementing research-based structures that we know work. So AVID and QTEL. PLCs, that is John Hattie's #1 strategy, impact on student learning. It's collective efficacy. And so we know that those are going to be the things that move the dial. And then professional development so that we know that staff have the resources and know how to use the tools that we give them through this work. So back to Director Nyquist, what's the percentage? And I would say this, if you're implementing systems that work, you should expect to see probably in years 3 through 5, I would say a 10% increase by year. I think it depends on what level, if you're talking about elementary versus middle school. And if you're talking about math versus reading, certainly I will tell you that our referral rates and our service in terms of special education, we have to tackle that if we want to get to 100%. So what I mean to say is without a solid MTSS system, I think for years we've said if students need help, the only way for them to get help is through special education services, and that's what an MTSS system is supposed to deliver as support. And I think that's the way we get it done. So what's the percentage? I want it to be all students. And what's the percentage in a year's time? I would say, is that a fully implemented MTSS system or a building MTSS system? I think it makes a difference. And I think it takes 3 to 5 years to be able to implement something that becomes systemic and a part of how we do business across the system. A healthy triangle is 80 to 85% in the green. and that you're intervening with between 10 and 15%.
Okay. I have constituent homework. Can I ask questions?
Sure.
So have we implemented a universal screening assessment at the K through 8 level?
That's the data I just showed you.
So
A
the-
universal screening assessment. We use Dibbles or Acadians, as it's now known, and Easy CBM, and we do that K-8. I would also suggest that we use a universal screening assessment at the high school, at least for freshmen, and that's an ORF, an oral reading fluency.
And we're doing that at what level? What grade level for K through 8?
All of them.
All grades, okay. So I have some question, besides it's my homework assignment, and you responded 2 different levels of MTSS. Have we implemented MTSS? And if so, which grades?
So we have MTSS systems K-8. Like I said before, in elementary, they have a lot of experience in reading, K-5, and are just kind of starting math now, but they've been at it a lot longer than middle school. This is year 2 for middle school MTSS. So yes, we have those systems. Yes, some are more fully implemented than others. And the newest is middle school, and that's 2 years. And that's in every single grade, K through 8. Again, I would say we need that at the high school level.
Okay. And so, thank you for that. Also, it's my understanding that, based on representations made at the listening session on February 4th, that our 2018-2019 scores in math for grade 3 was at 43%, grade 8 was 39%, and grade 11 was 32%. Those numbers sound about right, and are we moving them?
Okay, so great question. The scores that, I haven't double checked the 2018 scores, that sounds about right. Just to be sure, the scores, those scores are SBAC scores. So those are Smarter Balanced scores, and those are a summary assessment that's done at the end of the year. We haven't taken that assessment again yet. So it was available for students to take last year, but there weren't enough that participated to be able to take it. So for me to say, are we moving that dial? I would need for students to take that assessment again, and they will at the end of this year to be able to say, did that get better or did it not? So you're talking about 2 different kind of assessments and 2 different purposes. The reason we use these assessments 3 times a year is because we can tell then in the middle of the year how students are doing to be able to change our level of support and not wait until the SBAC at the end of the year before we say, oh, they didn't pass, it's too late. That's the whole reason we have these, to be able to say, are students doing better and or not, right? And so when I compare that and I compare the growth to 1920, I can start to see how students are doing as a group to say, are we getting better or are we not? But I wouldn't know and wouldn't be able to compare until they take that summative assessment at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. What's your ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness of what we're doing? What implementation issues are you having? And are you going to have recommendations for next year prior to budget? And will you know what those are going to cost?
Yeah, that's a great question, one I super appreciate. So I think implementation is going well, and I think it feels slower than you like because you want it to happen right now. I think the biggest thing that we'll run into, honestly, is time. So in order to have a full menu of interventions, you have to make sure that you have professional development for staff that are trained. And that's not just classroom teachers or English language arts teachers. That's also classified staff who are delivering it. That's also literacy specialists who are delivering it. So the amount of professional development time you need to have staff really highly trained in these different interventions for students who might need them, to be able to say, oh, I have this group of students, I'm going to give them a diagnostic assessment and assess who needs what and deliver the assessment that they need. That takes professional development time, and that's been tough. Because time has been so stretched this year, professional development is often the thing that either gets cut or switched out first, And in order to have a really full menu of interventions and a strong MTSS system, especially when we haven't before, you have to have enough time to train staff on how to do those things. And it's a pretty, it's a technical thing. It's some technical skills to be able to have to assess what exactly a kiddo needs, especially a middle school kiddo, what they may need. Middle school teachers generally are not trained in pre-service teaching or in teacher school on how to teach a child to read, right? Because they expect that, they're middle schoolers and they might not need that help. And so a lot of the training does happen once you become a teacher in a district. So I think that's one, it's cost and time. I think the other is just to focus on it. If we are going to, when we get this done, it will be because we have done this, because we have implemented MTSS systems.
So at this point, it's more resource of the team issue than a monetary issue? I mean,
Yeah, I think so. A little bit of both. Certainly professional development and resources are not cheap. We came to the board earlier in the year for a purchase that wasn't necessarily, it was a kind of a supplementary purchase. And if you remember, that was in the neighborhood of $325,000. Certainly interventions are not cheap because they're valuable, but certainly it will be professional development and it will be time. I don't know, Superintendent Saxton, you've had some time in this system and others as well who were implementing MTSS, if you have thoughts about that.
I do, if the board would like to hear. So just a couple different things. One is really interesting, really interesting data. I've looked at it a bunch of times since you put it together, just because I love looking at numbers like that and thinking about what they mean. I feel like I wouldn't be doing anybody justice if I didn't go back to talk about a couple of things. One of them is just how disruptive this year is and the previous year. I mean, we've had a really unusual circumstance when it comes to learning. And I've said this several times tonight. There's never been a time where education has been more disrupted that I can think of in the history of the United States than it has been during this, this special weird COVID situation. And when I look at the numbers, the data that was up for regular attenders, regular attenders mean that the student's on track or had 10 absences. And Assistant Superintendent Harlan talked about what that means when a certain number of your students are gone in class. But a lot of the research and data about regular attendance discusses how difficult it is for an individual student to make progress when they're gone that many days over the course of the school year, and just what a challenge it is for their learning to be on track and productive. So we are facing some challenges. But that being said, when I look at the program and the processes that the district has in place and think about best educational practice that the world has to offer or that we're aware of, I would turn to John Hattie, who's the foremost educational researcher in English-speaking countries, or maybe the world, and say, there are a couple different things that he says are best educational practice that have the greatest likelihood of causing student gain in learning over time. Number one on his list of 150 practices is teacher efficacy, which is promoted by the PLC system that we have in place in the district. So that's something that we have that we need to keep. Part of our early release Wednesdays centers on that. It is important for us to keep those. We only have retained one of those a month over the spring because of a workload issue, and it made a lot of sense for us to do that. We need to make sure that we recapture that going forward. It's a really important time for us. The third highest leverage point, number 3 out of 150 practices, is MTSS. And this district has been implementing RTI, which was the predecessor of MTSS, for a while, and at first not very effectively. And then I would say, over the last few years, much more effectively, including broadening its implementation to the secondary level. And it is extremely important that we have that we stick with it, and we make sure that it's well implemented. I've kind of numbered some things here. My number 3 was, you asked what's really hard to do, or what would be a barrier. And Assistant Superintendent Harlan talked about professional development, which is absolutely true. Doing that and doing it well is a challenge, and having enough of it to make sure that everybody is working in a smart and effective way. But something else I wrote down is fidelity. It's really difficult to make sure that things are happening as you intend when it comes to anything that you attempt to implement, right? Anything that you attempt to implement. When I think of the number of classrooms that exist, K through 8 in the district, and the recognition that there's opportunity for drift away from intent in every one of those, and yet I think the district has done an incredible job of working to manage that with professional development and with different measures that ensure higher levels of fidelity in each classroom. From our work with edX, which is Education Excellent, which is a super important part of that, to using AVID and QTEL strategies in instruction in the classroom. Those are all things that add to high levels of fidelity. And so while I think we face some barriers, I also think that what the district has put together is nearly precisely what it should be. And that the only way now that we're going to get where we need to go is with persistence and a deepening of implementation and fidelity along the way. And so that requires, again, PD and a high level of intensity and demand about what actually occurs. The last thing I would say is that it's been a real pleasure for me this year on Tuesday and Thursday mornings to have an opportunity to go into our schools. I try to visit 3 schools every Tuesday and Thursday morning, and principals take me into classrooms. And I have been incredibly pleased with the kind of instruction that I witness within those classrooms, and some of the fidelity that I see that comes along with that. And my eye is not nearly as practiced as your new superintendent's eye is when it comes to instruction. I hold Andy in one of the highest regards in his ability to look at that and understand it in a really deep way when it comes to superintendents in the state. I'm not as practiced, but I do know what good instruction is and what it looks like, and can evaluate that in fairly short order. Not my intent of my visits, by the way, but I can't help myself when I walk into a classroom. And what I see tells me that there's a lot that the district should be proud of with instruction in classroom, with teachers working really hard and working smart with kids. And that when we have kids who are behind, that there is added intensity and instruction in smaller group learning environments that are key to helping struggling learners catch up. So all those things, along with, when we talk about resource, one of the resources I worry about is the resource that it takes to offer after-school tutoring, summer programs, and other kinds of catch-up programs. So I worry about that one a little bit, because I think we have some money to do some of those things with ESSER, but that those things won't last over time. Mm-hmm. So we're going to need to use those with, in a really smart way with high levels of intensity, because if you look at this data, you can see that from the previous year of assessment until this year at the start, there was a drop-off in student start point by and large. And so I went really long-winded on all that, but I think these are things that are incredibly important, and I worry, one of my biggest worries about this kind of thing is that really good, smart, deep implementation will be put in place, and because there isn't an overnight improvement, we start to walk away. I think about, I consider myself a incredibly gifted fisherman. Oh, brother. I like to fish a lot. I don't know if I'm gifted at it or not. And I know that when something doesn't happen for me right away, I want to change what's on the end of my line, or I want to think about doing it in a different way, right? No. If it's the best that there is, you got to stick with it, and you keep working it, and you're going to get there, right? And that's what you have in this district. And so making sure that it's done with a high level of fidelity and professional development are going to be the keys to making this happen. That's my recommendation as somebody who's been here a short time and is going to walk out the door in about 4.5, 5 months. But I want to have the board hear me say that. I want the community to hear me say that. What you have is the right thing. Stay on it. All right, enough from me.
So Superintendent Saxton,
Yes, sir.
so we feared, and it just intuitively it seemed like, and I think it's now confirmed, that kids were starting in general behind or lower, and at least my angst, what are we going to do to catch those kids up? And the general answer I got, and maybe people were saying it just to make me go away, but was the teachers will handle it. Let them take care of it. And so tell me now, we're halfway through February, how are we doing? And what's the projection year in look like? And is there, if it doesn't look good, is there anything we can do to bend that curve?
My answer is really not very granular. My answer is we're doing okay. I don't think of myself as an excuse maker. I don't like that. I do think that we do face some obstacles this year that are unique. Without those, I think we would be doing much better. The attendance thing makes me a little bit crazy, but I think that we will see at the end of the year students who are not quite where we would have been, we're not quite where we were a couple years ago, but who will be making progress and will get there. It's going to take, all of this year, and it's going to take all of next year to get there. I don't know if you would answer differently, please.
Yeah, I think I would answer similarly. I think, what happens is that kids receive small group intervention, and the number of interventions they need or the length of time they need that is increased than it has been maybe in years past. But we know that that small group intervention paired with what they need works. So I think it may not be as linear as, everyone is caught up by the end of the year, but I think those small groups, that intervention will work. I think it will take a little longer than certainly folks anticipate, but I think it's the right direction. I think it's never fast enough, and it never feels like it's enough. Yeah.
So my last question, I promise, for tonight. So you identify regular attendees as any student that's missed less than 10 days? Is that what I heard to be right?
The state defines it that way, yes.
Okay, so the 40% that missed 10 days or more, what percent of that's COVID?
I would say a large percentage of that is attributable to COVID, especially because we've had to have quarantine. And quarantine used to be 10 days. So if you got quarantined, it's automatic.
Well, I will tell you, in these numbers for our regular attenders for 21-22, it does not include quarantines.
Oh, is that right?
It includes.
But it includes illness.
It includes illness, but it includes no Qs, no quarantines. If we had included Q, the quarantine in that, it would be much worse. So the regular attenders, do I think there were more illnesses? Absolutely, I do. But just to be really clear, the regular attender data for this year that you see up there does not include quarantines.
But it includes if they're COVID positive.
Correct.
Right, or someone in the family. So one of my questions here, Roger got on it, was obviously we can't teach kids if they're not getting to school. That's kind of evident, right? So back in my day, I never had a truancy officer look for me, but I knew we used to have that kind of thing. So what happens now if Betty Sue or Mark misses, so many days? How do we make sure that we're getting them into the classes?
Yeah, so we have this similar system that we've had for years, which is after a certain amount of days, obviously contact is made home daily, but then we use our family support liaisons or our FACT workers, and that's exactly what they do. So they make home visits or contact with the family to figure out what is the barrier for them. And we have resources that we use from FACT, and then we also have a family support liaison from the ESD. And that's typically what we've done. In the past, they've called them truancy officers, and there's been some citation at the end that people felt like kind of was the hammer that would get people going. Not super effective. We do contract out with the ESD for a family support liaison to do much of the same work, which is home visits, contact with families, and contact with students to figure out what they need to re-engage. And we have 6, I think, social workers now doing that work.
So everything about that is very similar, with the exception of no citation at the end.
Right. And in the years past, I would say in the 19, 20, 18, 19, there were only 2 citations issued total.
Sure. So, I mean, not that we're in the business to give tickets, and we don't want to give tickets, but we also want to get kids to school, you
Right.
know? So, I
Right.
mean, if parents aren't getting kids to school, there's got to be some kind of ability to do that.
Right.
Just, you don't need to answer, I'm just curious.
No, it's okay. I just, again, effective best practice would tell you that that's not it.
Going back to the math data, it looks like with the exception of maybe one school, we lost ground everywhere in math. I'm assuming that's not typical. I
Well,
guess the question is that typical to lose ground between fall and winter?
that's hard to know if it's typical for our district because we haven't had universal screeners in math for very long, specifically at the elementary level. One of the things that I hear that's difficult about kind of the math assessment piece is depending on the order that you do the units, has a student learned a certain skill before that assessment comes? But I would say it's not typical and shouldn't be typical. And that if we have a percentage of students who aren't starting at grade level, that they're likely focusing on some prerequisite skills. So when the winter benchmark comes, that they're not at the place they need to be.
Yeah, because looking at those numbers, I started off with concerned and got closer to alarmed.
Did you notice the anomaly in there for elementary?
Yes.
And there's a reason for that anomaly.
Yeah, I was going to call them out because give them some praise because they were the only school that when it was periwinkle.
Well, of Waverly in math.
Periwinkle went from 40 to 42.58. Waverly went down from 45.83 to 40.25.
So one of the things, periwinkle to 42. So one of the things that we do when we look at data is look at patterns, trends, outliers, and anomalies to figure out kind of why and what's happening and what that looks like to be able to learn, you know, what that best practice is for other folks to replicate collective efficacy. That's what that is. And one of the things that we know only one of our elementary schools has that's been particularly effective is part of a teacher who is a math coach, who literally goes in, observes, and gives feedback to teachers specific on their math coaching practices at the elementary level. And we know that that's been effective. I think having curriculum adoption this year and next year is an opportunity that we need to seize to make sure that our core curriculum has foundational skills and lots of practice embedded, because that's one thing that I noticed, that we have opportunities now in both our language arts and our math curriculums. Because when you see percentages like this, that's a core problem, right? We can't intervene our way out of that. We certainly have interventions and need to attack it from both ends, but that is a core instruction problem when you're not at 80%.
It's a problem for sure, yeah. But thank you, I appreciate it.
One of the practices that I've witnessed also in the district, just so you all know, is collecting this kind of data, sitting people down, looking at it, having a protocol to talk about it,
Yeah.
and then make decisions about what to do about it so that it doesn't stay this way. And so I've sat in on that effort and those practices. You always try to do that absent emotion so that you can, really be thinking about what it is and trying to identify precisely what's missing or what you might do differently. Always easier said than done, but the district has been practicing at this long enough that they're starting to really get good at it. So a fun process to watch and participate in.
That's a good point. So schools sit down with their own data to look at not only as a trend, but also student by student. So we call those 100% meetings and 20% meetings. And that is where there's power. If schools don't do that, then it's difficult to make change.
Michael?
Yeah,
I'm always cautious about curriculum changing, because then we do have to redo a lot of professional development. Things change for the students that are working, but if you think it would help, then it could be a positive. I had a question about preschool. Are we getting grant money from the state or the federal government for Title I schools to provide preschool?
So we have several different actually funding streams. One of them is the KPI, Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation, can't remember.
And innovation.
Yep.
Grant, yep.
So we are current KPI recipients of some of those grants, and we're actually going out for an additional one that we think will allow us to be able to open an additional preschool for next year. But we certainly have both state and federal funds, both grant funds and others that allow us to do that.
Preschool Promise?
Preschool Promise as well, yep.
So the state has started to invest more, more specifically around preschool, and the district has tried to avail themselves to those dollars in KPI and
Preschool Promise.
and Preschool Promise. They have to have all these clever names.
Oh, I was gonna say, Waverly has had a preschool for 5 or 6 years now. And their
Probably 4.
production is only half of what most other schools are at, for scores. But then we have to tell our neighbors that we're only opening preschools at certain schools. My neighbor has to drive his kid to West Salem to go to preschool. So my plan is, where does the district plan to put preschools? Are they geographically, are they economically impact? How do we make it equitable for all of our constituents?
So I don't know the answer to that specifically. I would assume that the idea for the district would be that we would target preschools at our lowest income schools to start with, just on a consideration of working toward equitable outcome, and students typically more likely to be in need. Also, when we get dollars from the state in things like KPI and Preschool Promise, those dollars are specifically targeted to our lower income schools, and we don't get money from the state for, if we were to try to apply those at some of our higher income schools, we wouldn't get the money to do that. They give us the grant because we're targeting lower income schools. So that's another piece of it, is just the availability of money to do it. I think budgetarily, it would be pretty impossible for the district to implement preschool at all of our schools, just with the number of dollars that we have.
Might I suggest that superintendent, you and the assistant superintendent meet with the chair as these dollars roll in and you're targeting what the plan might be for next year, so the chair is on the front end of that, and there's at least board input that way?
Sure.
Michael, last chance. Thank you, Mr. Arnold.
All right.
In 1 second, I get back to the. New business. M1. This is going to be some policies.
No bond business?
No bond business.
Yes. This M2?
M1.
M1. Sorry about that. Yes. M1. This policy, BDD, let's see, BDA, board meetings. This is a policy update from OSBA because there's been some change in law from decisions that the legislature made, and they're before the board for first reading. And these policies meet our current practice and also new current law. So the changes that are in those reflect that. And that goes for both item BD, BDA, which is M2, and then also M3, BD, DH, public comments at board meetings. Both of these, again, are recommended by OSBA with the changes and then are specific to our practice, and they're up for first reading.
I do appreciate the attendance policy that we just kind of went over a little bit, is in there, has some actionary steps. I do appreciate that it has some policy in there on actionary steps for absences. Just covered.
And Chair Aganagwa, on item M1, so my apology, agenda item M1, these are policies that are remaining from policy J. These came forward to the board previously in June. And then there were some that, most of section J came forward in June, and there were some that were left over. These are the remaining policies. We have 2 board members that are on our policy committee. And Director Morris and Director Thompson. There are a number of other people who are on the policy committee, myself, members from the community, Javier Cervantes, our EDI director, Assistant Superintendent Harlan is also on that, and we spend, with advice from OSBA, a lot of time reading through policy, looking at current law, and matching everything up so that what we have is up to date and makes sense. It is the intent of the district to go through the entirety of our policies this year through an update process to make sure that they are where they need to be. We'll be bringing forward large sections of policy like this to the board for your consideration. These are up for first reading. Our thinking on this is that with the work that's been put into it, they should be in good shape for adoption on the part of the board, and they would come forward to the board at the next board meeting. You certainly may look at them and see a change or two, but we hope there wouldn't be much more than that, just with the work that we've put in to try to read through them with a fine-tooth comb and make recommendations that fit within the intent of the way the district thinks about policy and the board thinks about policy. If there are questions, or if any of the board members would like to add to that.
I have a question on JFC-AR. There's an addition that says the district will use restorative justice practices as well as appropriate disciplinary procedures to remedy behavioral problems. Could you please describe what restorative justice practices are and some examples of what that might be?
Sure. Yeah, I can go ahead and give you some practices. So one of the things, I'll give a typical example if there's a physical conflict at a middle school. A restorative practice might be after talking with both of those students individually to figure out what happened and kind of getting to the bottom of it, having a restorative conversation with both of those individuals together and an adult mediating that conversation. So bringing together 2 students who might have been in conflict to be able to say, okay, how do we move forward and how do we kind of coexist in this space? So that would be an example of a restorative conversation. So it's really about when there's conflict, repairing that conflict and repairing relationships to be able to move forward in a positive way. Okay. It might include restitution as well, like if there is something that's maybe not a person, but it has some vandalism or things like that. It might also include, you know, some kind of restorative practice might be restitution to make whole whatever happened. But most of the time it's really about restorative conversations between kiddos.
No, there's no
no
action required. This comes back to board
Yeah.
for potential approval to the next board meeting.
Director Wilson, did you have any following questions? I see you're scrolling, so I don't want to rush you.
Yeah, I've read through this a couple times, but one of the questions We have some substantial behavioral issues in the classroom. And I'm just curious if we had the opportunity to talk to any of the teachers about what tools they would want added in here, if that's appropriate to do, to make sure that we're addressing their needs. Have we reached out to them to figure out if these policies are going to meet their requirements?
I don't think that we have. Yeah, in regard to this policy, we have not.
Would that be possible to get their input?
We can always get folks' input for sure. We need to make sure that the policy is what the board would want to adopt and that it fits within Oregon law.
Certainly.
One of the things I would point out is, the purpose of the policy is to give kind of the bigger framework. It generally doesn't get into things like, for example, at the middle school level, you might have a matrix that is a behavior matrix that the schools use that is common and that the administrators use that is common in terms of behavior and consequence. That's not something we would put in policy because it could change and probably should change as different things happen. It's certainly not all-inclusive. Kids are more creative with what happens than we could, have the foresight to plan for. And so really the purpose of policy is to give that overall framework, and either in the ARs or in the actual practices that happen generally through our student code of conduct or things like that are the things that you would see schools using. And that isn't something that necessarily you would put in policy, like a behavior matrix, although that already exists. The other thing I would want to point out that is new in terms of law is the use of exclusionary practices like out-of-school suspension for students that are K-5. There's state law that says you can only use out-of-school suspension if there are 3 things that are true, and you'll see that in policy, and I don't know how much the general public, certainly education and educators are, that changed, and it limits the practice of that for students who are elementary students to very specific circumstances, and you'll see that reflected in policy.
He's good.
You're good, Ms. Rosen?
Yeah, we can carry on. Sorry, I didn't know you were waiting on me.
No worries. All right, so we'll see M1, M2 will come back. Please provide your notes to the superintendent. M3 will come back. M4. So we've seen M4 before, but we're not going to take action tonight? Or?
I think this is an action item. So this is the ESD local service plan and resolution. And I know that we have Assistant Superintendent from the ESD, Jason Hay, here, who can speak to the local service plan. What I would say to the board, I think part of this is that we've had some discussion about this. I know I've had individual discussion with board members about what an ESD does, what it does do. And Jason, if you want to speak to those things, I'd be happy to let you do that. But having been an ESD superintendent once upon a time. Just for people in the public, an ESD is an education service district, and it serves a number of different districts within a given region in the state. I think there are 19 of them in the state of Oregon. Our ESD serves Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties and the school districts that are in those counties. In trying to describe an education service district, I think of it as a cooperative where many services are provided, but especially those that are fairly high cost that don't occur very often. So the easiest example for me would be a student information system. A student information system for a district like us to use would probably cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million to purchase. It costs us a couple of million a year to maintain. And if it was going to be what we wanted it to be, we would hire code writers to alter that system over time so it would meet our needs specifically. When we go in combination with the Education Service District, Lynn, Benton, Lincoln, and other districts in the region, we can pool our money and only do that one time. So it gets purchased, and then there's a yearly operating cost that we all share and code writers that we all hire so that Albany doesn't have to do that all by itself. Instead, it works with all the other school districts in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln County to do that. And we come together every year and talk about what are the services that we should share that would be really smart to keep so that we have really great service to kids and we keep costs driven down as much as possible. There are all kinds of services that can fit under that kind of an umbrella, and those services come forward to us in the ESD Local Services Plan and Resolution. And so, sorry about that, Jason, but there are some other things that you would want to make sure that the board knows or specifics.
You absolutely could say it much better than I could, and with your experience, but I gave your packet beginning on page, that's on page 82 is the beginning. I certainly would answer any questions. The services that we provide are outlined within the service plan. I also would point you to, if you're just interested in some data, that on page 138 of your packet, or page 57 of this document, is actually just a snapshot of some of the data that your district receives. So, a student information system is a great example. Another example that I typically use when I talk to people would be an occupational therapist. How many occupational therapist hours does the school district need? Sometimes you definitely need occupational therapist hours, but you might not need an entire full-time FTE of an occupational therapist. We employ a number of them and then share that throughout the. Answer any questions? Otherwise, it's in that.
And I would recommend the board adopt the local service plan as presented.
I just want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, because it sounds a lot like the UN sometimes, and we're your largest school district in the LBL.
Yes.
And so we're probably paying a lot for this student, a lot more than Sweet Home would pay for the student information system.
Yeah, it's all a ratio based on the number of students that the district have. But there are a number of things that if you still wanted to do it, example that Superintendent Saxton shared is a good one. There are a number of things the district still couldn't afford and basically would struggle with things much more than if we looked at it before.
So if that system is $5 million, is it $5 million for each individual district would have to buy it purchased separately?
Not necessarily, but if there's a startup cost to that, we're actually looking at a new information system that the collective superintendent governance body actually decided to move to a new system that we're going to be working on in the coming 2 years to be able to roll out. And there's a startup cost that is tremendously high, even if you're a small district. Honestly, smaller districts would be hurt even more. But just the startup cost for gas would hurt very much for you to do it.
So I guess if you're a very small district, you're going to run out of ESD money really quick. but you're still able to get resources from them that GAPS is paying, the GAPS and Corvallis are paying the bulk.
Well, it's still, GAPS is still getting more of the resources. They put in more revenue essentially to the pie, but are also getting the resources as well. When you look at the pie being sliced in that equitable way.
So is it on exact proportional amount?
It's proportional.
Just as a point of reference for our student information system, for example, they charge us per pupil. So we put in more, but certainly because we're the biggest district, we have.
Well, there's got to
they're
be other
charged more.
programs that are just a base price.
Well, if I might, in my day job, I have groups that are a Lynn, Benton, Lincoln alignment, and I have other groups that are aligned differently. And the Lynn, Benton, Lincoln, I represent the largest of the groups, and with the other alignments where I'm a much smaller, the level of service and the return of the phone call doesn't happen quite the same as if I'm aligned with Lynn, Benton, Lincoln. So
I'm not against it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against it, but if Sweet Home isn't putting anything in for an occupational therapist, it's still a benefit that they can call on.
It would be equivalent to their number of students, and so
Okay.
they would be putting that in, and they would be getting their needs met in the equivalent.
Thank you. So your motion to accept staff's proposal as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you.
Okay.
It's going to move us into the revised budget committee calendar.
Yes, so we have a revised budget committee calendar. It's in your packet, set for approval. You can see that we've moved some dates on budget meetings. This has to do with some of the new folks that we brought on board in support of our budget process this year, and these dates make this work. And so without that, it's going to be a much bigger challenge for us. So if we could amend the calendar, that would be terrific.
I'll move to approve revised budget committee calendar.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you.
Before I vote, could I get a clarification? These moved dates will not conflict with any Oregon State baseball games?
With rainouts possible, I make no promises.
It's a good time to be a gossip. And future items? Any informational business? Hearing none, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.